There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Just let you know that this workshop will be recorded, and we'll send you the recording later. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Gunn. I am the coordinator of digital scholarship here at Catholic University of America Libraries. We are joined today by Pascal Calarco, the Bibliometrics and Research Impact Librarian at the University of Windsor in Ontario, Canada. Welcome, Pascal.
Thank you.
This afternoon, we're going to talk about scholarly metrics and altmetrics and what are most useful to you in measuring your research impact. There we go. We ask that you leave your questions to the end of the presentation. So off we go.
Kevin, I'll watch those who need admittance, and
Okay.
I can admit those so you're not distracted.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. So what will we cover today? We're going to look at what are altmetrics and their utility. How useful can they be in looking at your research impact? We're going to be looking at how these are different from traditional metrics. We're going to be looking at the variety of tools and measures that are available to you. We're also going to be looking at some of the caveats about metrics and their use and their limitations. We're also going to be looking at sort of a basket of measures on research impact and quality. And then we'll look at discipline and metrics. And what we'll do is compare a physicist and philosopher's profiles to give you a sense of the varying degrees out there, how research profiles can vary. And then at the end, we'll review what we've talked about and then answer any of your questions. All right, so why is this important? Why are you showing up today? So there are three primary themes that come to mind here. The first theme is that research is increasingly global in nature. So this can take the form of countries such as China, India, and others who are quickly creating a vast amount of scholarship. So a big question is, how can we ascertain their importance in a meaningful way? Second thing we need to consider is the whole idea of collaboration. Research is increasingly collaborative and multi-institutional and multinational in nature. It's not uncommon to have researchers working on different continents on the same project. The second general theme we're looking at is universities are under increasing pressure to diversify income, and namely that's talking about seeking external funding. So external funding can help bolster graduate education, research infrastructure, and faculty and staff support costs. The third theme is the increased interest of the public and government in research. So research universities can add significantly to the economic health of an area. So we know that public funding of research is increasingly seen as a societal investment. And in fact, the public has a right to know what is being researched, especially at public funded institutions. And this is becoming increasingly important. Last, you have the idea of knowledge mobilization. So making research understandable to the public is also considered to be a societal good. So we've got talk just very briefly here. Now while a lot can be measured in the research universe, it is important to keep in mind that metrics do have limitations. So as William Bruce Cameron stated many years ago, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. It is vitally important for the researcher to be aware of these limitations and to be on guard against malfeasant use of metrics by actors, agents, companies, institutions that may have a specific agenda. So for example, looking at predatory publishers, I have seen websites where predatory publishers have put their journal impact factor logo on their website to denote the importance of their journals. However, journal impact factor is a trademark owned by Clarivate Analytics. To talk about the journal impact factor without reference to Clarivate Analytics is simply meaningless. Furthermore, if you were to check Clarivate Analytics database, you will confirm that you will be able to confirm the impact factor of their said journal, even if with the even possibility that it's not even in their database. So the predator publisher is hoping you will not bother to delve further. So that's something to keep in mind. So Altmetrics, it exists in a much larger universe. We have Bibliometrics. I think we're all familiar with that. It was coined in 1969 by Alan Pritchard, and it basically deals with the application of mathematics and statistical methods to books and other media of communication. That same year, Vasily Nalimov came out with the term scientometrics, where he studied the study of the growth, structure, interrelationships, and productivity of scholarly scientific literature. And then if we flash forward to 1997, Almond and Ingwertsen came up with the concept of webometrics. The term webometrics, the measurement of the structure and use of the web. This was based originally on bibliometrics. The next concept, informetrics, this is the study of the quantitative aspects of information in any form by any social group. And it was coined in 1979 by a person by the name of O. Nacht. It has gradually encompassed the above metrics, including altmetrics. So it started off with bibliometrics and scientometrics, but it's expanded out since 1979 to include webometrics and altmetrics. And of course, altmetrics was coined in 2010, very recently, coined by Priam, Taraborelli, Groth, and Nalon, and they wrote a altmetrics manifesto that you can find on the web. And they consider altmetrics as the online engagement with scholarly output. So it is considered to be non-traditional bibliometrics that complement or is viewed as an alternative to more traditional citation impact metrics. So that's the big picture of metrics. So what are the different perspectives on measuring research? Well, this question we have to ask is, who's interested in measuring research and output? Who are the stakeholders here? So first up, department chairs, they'll be interested in comparing their departments with other departments at other institutions. So at your institution, you may have a department of sponsored programs and research services, or an office of research and innovation services. They go by different names. They will be interested in measuring the institution as a whole and how well, you say, Catholic and Windsor compete with aspirational peers. So the quality and quantity of scholarship will inform the measure of success in grant funding in that regard. Another stakeholder are university committees. So metrics are one factor in hiring, tenure, and promotion decisions. So you always want to be aware of those. Then for graduate students, their work will define their academic expertise through early career publications and metrics that will play a role there. And last, a successful research team can attract students to graduate programs given really good metrics. So what is typically measured for all this? So the goal is to measure performance, but what exactly is typically measured? What we should keep in mind is the relationship between citations and all the variations of that and research quality. We always have that in the back of our mind. So if we're looking at journals, for example, we look at their impact factor, the number of times they're cited, the number of articles that are published in the journal, where are the journals indexed? And of course, where's their availability? Are they have open access or do they have paywall access? To a certain degree, this includes articles as well, the number of citations, how often that article can be cited, the question of availability, whether it's an open access or whether it's paywall access. Keep in mind, they have done studies that that show that articles that have been published in open access journals have higher citation numbers than paywall articles. So it's always something to keep in mind. Next are books. So we've traditionally, Bibliometrics, who counted the number of books, the holdings in libraries and institutions and that. But what is emerging out there is the whole idea of citations of books. So for example, you have a bibliography at the end of a book, all that can be counted. So there is a movement afoot to start counting those kinds of citations. And of course, there's the reviews of books that are provided. Last, you have authors and institutions. So you can have the research impact of individuals and research teams. You can have comparisons between departments across peer and aspirational institutions. So all these can be measured to various ways. And now I'm going to turn it over to Pascal.
Thanks, Kevin. So from the earliest days in the 1970s, when the Institute for Scientific Information was started by Eugene Garfield and some of his collaborators, this came out of the chemical information area. And he was interested in the variety of co-citation by chemists in their literature. And today in 2021, it's a much larger field, this area of scholarship analytics. Publishers are involved. Elsevier prominently has been buying up companies, and they've been, in a sense, transforming themselves from a traditional publisher, probably because I think they see that the progress of open access means that eventually there's going to be far less commercial publication of scholarship. And, that's certainly the way things are advancing. And so they're trying to diversify their work and their value to both the library community and more broadly the information publishing community. Then you have specifically bibliometric and research impact companies like Clarivate, which used to be Thomson ISI, and so it has a long history there. Clarivate is now in talks with acquiring Ex Libris and ProQuest. And so there could be further consolidation in that front there. Digital Science is a UK-based organization which has a large portfolio of tools and platforms in this space. And then, we have Google with its Google Scholar, and we'll take a look at a little bit some of their tools as well. And then, of course, you have research funders, which are interested as consumers of a lot of these kinds of analytics. Next slide. Looking at this a little bit more closely, each of these companies has different products. Elsevier has a product line that is consonant with what Clarivate has. So they have a basic bibliographic index called Scopus, whereas Clarivate has something similar called Web of Science. And Web of Science has been around for quite a while now. Scopus is a newer product. They also both have what might be called an institutional scientific ranking platform. And with Elsevier, we're going to look today a little bit at their product called Scival, which institutions typically use to get a 50,000-foot view of how a particular university or research organization compares to their global peers. And this can be used really from the department level to the research group level, overall to the entire university. And Clarivate has a similar product called Insights, which can do the same thing. Name disambiguation becomes important in these products. So the use of ORCID and researcher ID to definitively identify individual faculty from another, because faculty do move around from institution to institution, that becomes quite important. And then the last piece that each of these companies have developed is what we might call our research information system, which tries to encompass the totality of research that's done at an institution, from collaboration between groups and individuals, both at the institution and elsewhere, combined with funding opportunities. So you can think of all the federal agency grants that are available. And then leveraging things that are in Scival and Insights to give some kind of strategic assessment of those groups. So, of course, Elsevier and Clarivate would love it if you buy all three of their products. Goes without saying, right? Digital Science is the company that started the Altmetric product. And while Altmetrics is a concept that is distinct from the Altmetric product that Digital Science sells and continues to develop, it's often the case that when you talk about Altmetrics, you're still really talking about Altmetric, the product, and we'll take a little bit of a look at that. Clarivate also has the journal citation reports, which has been around for quite a while as well. And out of that, they have a unique metric called the Journal Impact Factor, and we'll look at that. They also have newer products like the Essential Science Indicators. Elsevier has been, of course, using their war chest to buy up a lot of companies in recent years. Mendeley is another Elsevier product. Plumx Metrics, which is another dashboardy kind of visualization tool that Elsevier has incorporated across the suite of their products, and something newer called NewsFlow. Ex Libris and ProQuest have two products that are kind of worthy of mentioning here. Esploro is kind of a mixture between an institutional repository, so for those initial papers that an institution, their faculty might produce, as well as a data repository. So the underlying data that go into producing that research, particularly in the sciences, and then also some of the funding pieces. And the funding pieces come into one of their products called Pivot, which is a funder current awareness tool. So we use Pivot here at Windsor, and one can sign up for it, fill out a profile. What disciplinary areas are you interested in receiving notifications for. A lot of it is US based. So, okay, here's a new NSF grant, here's a new NEH grant, etc., including foundations and other kinds of smaller offerings and whatnot. And then finally, Google with its Google Scholar product, which has been around for some time now, probably more than 10 years. So these are by no means an exhaustive list, but these are kind of the major players in the space. Next slide. So let's begin by talking about traditional scholarly metrics, which really begin from the mostly STEM literature and involve articles within journals. And we've got a screenshot here from Web of Science from detailing Provost Dominguez at Catholic University. And this is kind of an author profile within Web of Science and serves as kind of a bibliometric CV, if you like, where a particular individual has worked, what papers have they produced, how much has that been cited, and then those things with the combination over time. So those produce some of the basic metrics that you're going to look at. One thing that they all provide for is an H factor. And an H factor says that with a value of H, a particular author will have produced that number of papers with that number of citations over a specified period of time. So if I have an H factor of 10, it means that I have 10 papers that have produced 10 citations, in the last 5 years, for example. Next slide. So thinking about some of these traditional metrics, let's just elucidate kind of, some of the most important ones. The first set to when you're doing any kind of analysis is your publication set. And your publication set are the number of publications that are ascribed to a particular author over a period of time. Within that publication set, you're going to have an aggregated number of citations within secondary literature that reference those publications. And these basic numbers are going to feed into some basic metrics that flow into more advanced metrics. So you're going to get the average number of citations per publication for that particular author. You're also going to be able to calculate the H index, which is available in Google Scholar, Web of Science, and Scopus for that particular author. And we'll talk about some of the differences that one will see with the H index over those three products and how you need to bring a critical eye to the H index because it can easily be spoofed, perhaps. Elsevier has come up with an interesting metric that has a lot of value called the field weighted citation impact. And that's available in both Scopus and Scival. And the field weighted citation impact calculates the number of citations received by an author's publications compared with the average number of citations received in a particular disciplinary set of publications. So thinking about, say, economics, right? If I publish in economics, they're going to look at the set of titles that most economics researchers also publish in, and compare my performance with everybody else across the globe, how many they typically perform. So what you get with a field weighted citation impact number is an assessment within the discipline from all other similar peer researchers across the globe. It's a very powerful number. So these 5 numbers here really constitute, the base things that I think anybody should probably know if they're interested in looking at scholarship performance and assessment. Next. There's other things. I mentioned the journal impact factor before that's available in Clarivate. It's actually a separate product from Web of Science. So depending on your institution, you may or may not have access to the journal impact factor. From what we can see here, we see a journal's impact over time. That represents the bars on here over the past 5 years, and then the line represents the average impact of all journals within a particular discipline. So this is looking specifically at one of the more highly rated physics journals, which is Physics Letters A. And we can see here that Physics Letters A for most years actually outperforms the average journal. So that's a mark of quality for that journal in terms of its usage and its citation and its impact on the discipline of physics. With all of this information digital now, you can do interesting visualization things. And we have here a visualization of the totality of some significant disciplines of scholarship, from psychology and humanities, the social sciences, engineering, physics, medicine, and you see different clusters of usage here, as well as some of the most prominent journals within that. It's not, so useful in terms of doing analysis on a particular journal, but it does show that when you aggregate this information, you can do kind of interesting things in showing the relationship and the impact of each of these scholarly disciplines to one another. Next. We mentioned book citation as kind of an emerging thing, and it's still pretty much in its infancy. Clarivate has a book citation index that's been incorporated into its core products. I think there's about 250,000 books that are in there. On the Clarivate website, you can go in, and this is as part of their marketing and sales material, so it's not paywalled. You can do a search for an area of study, a book series, a particular ISBN, a publisher, and find out how many books and which books those are included in the core Web of Science product. So here I've done a search for medieval philosophy, and there's 125 books in medieval philosophy included in the book citation index. So it's still quite young and still developing. These are highly curated books, though. So it's not a bad thing that it is quite selective, because Clarivate is, concerned that they want to maintain a certain level of quality when selecting materials to go into this index. Next. So all this leads up to Altmetrics as the latest metric in this continuum, I guess. And, you know, a good pithy definition of Altmetrics is that they are metrics and qualitative data that are complementary to traditional citation-based metrics. That's taken from the Altmetric website. They're different from traditional scholarly metrics in that the context of these is explicitly internet based, right? They typically use social media, online news, other qualitative mention review websites in calculating the impact of a particular story. So as an example, you could have a researcher at Catholic who is doing some work in chemistry, and they have come out with a new chemical that's important in, I don't know, some synthetic compound that's going to cross over into the consumer space, right? Maybe there's a patent around it. And the Washington Post picks up this story and publishes a story about it. And somebody reads that story and goes on to the Washington Post website and tweets about it. And then somebody sees that tweet and they share it on Facebook and also on LinkedIn, etc. And these are good examples of the kind of life stream of an alt metric. Next page. So here's a good example. It's an article from Nature, and it's very highly cited. This is the toxic truth about sugar, and this got 33 news mentions. It was blogged by another 33 people. They referenced this in policy sources. It got lots of tweets. It was mentioned in a patent, got Facebook and LinkedIn mentions. It's even on Wikipedia. So you get a sense here of all of the sources that the product Altmetric is using to calculate a numeric number for any kind of piece of media. So typically in here, you have news mentions. You have something like, you know, Mendeley incorporates some of this with its kind of social impact measures. And then I've mentioned the social media mentions on here as well. Next page. We're going to go into some more in-depth tools and examples next. Next page, Kev. And I've provided you the links here for the records that we're going to look at. You know, the folks on this meeting may have access to some of these or all of these. Google Scholar is open. It's not behind a paywall, whereas Web of Science, Scopus, and Scival are. But I have access to all of these. And so I'm going to quickly start looking at my screen here.
Do you want to share your screen, Pascal? Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So we're going to start out with Google Scholar, which everybody has access to. And we're going to look at two researchers from Catholic University, Provost Aaron Dominguez, who's a very well published researcher in physics. And we're also going to look at Timothy Nguyen, who's a medieval philosopher. and we'll see some of the differences between these. So here's the Google Scholar page for Dr. Dominguez. We can see here on the right his number of citation counts, and also a list of publications in order of the ones that are most cited, and going down from there. And the total number of citations, and then those since 2016. So we have just a few numbers here with Google Scholar. We have the H index, as we have mentioned, and hovering over each of these will give you a little tooltip on how these are calculated. Google Scholar has a particular metric that it's come up with called the I-10 index, and that's the number of publications with at least 10 citations. And the second column has the most recent version of this, which is the number of publications that have received at least 10 new citations in the last 5 years. So you'll see both of those numbers here. So we have a lot of information about someone who is published in physics. Now, if we pop over to Dr. Noon, medieval philosopher at Catholic, we see far fewer citations. And, we can ask ourselves why that is. Well, mostly Dr. Noon publishes in books, and books aren't well represented in this area of scholarly metrics. There are some here, and he has published in some journals and whatnot. But you get a sense that it's really dependent on the disciplinarity of the researcher involved on how much information you're going to be able to get. Now, if we pop over to Web of Science, this is the kind of landing page citation report for Dr. Dominguez. And here again, we see the number of publications represented in this bar graph, and then the number of citations in this line graph over time. Some of those basic numbers for anybody that are kind of foundational to looking at any kind of bibliometric analysis. Dr. Dominguez has an H index of 120. So that would be 120 publications with at least 120 citations, right? He in Web of Science, he's been cited 81,000 times. And there's also a notion of excluding those citations that one includes in their own publications. This is a way that one can inflate one's own H index value, is by citing yourself. And this is how one can spoof a high H index. So you have to be careful with that. But we do see that at least within the scholarship that's in Web of Science, Dr. Dominguez gets an average of 48 citations per publication over his whole publication corpus. We also see here that 1,703 publications are included in Web of Science. Now, if we just pop back to the number that we had in Google Scholar, that was 1,017 articles. And you're going to see different numbers in each of these tools. That's because each of these tools select different parts of the scholarship universe. They don't all have the same publication set that they all include. So you're going to get different numbers. And so when you're looking at these, you have to kind of bring a critical eye to understand what part of the publication set they're looking at. Looking at Dr. Noon, here's his landing page as an author. And we see far fewer both publications and indexes and those things that are indexed, and his H index in here, because it's so monograph heavy, is only an H index of 4 because he writes far more in monograph length works. So this just underscores again having to look at disciplinary eye when you're using these tools. And Scopus and Web of Science in particular are going to be most appropriate for use probably outside of the humanities, unfortunately. The third tool we can look at here is Scopus. I personally think Elsevier has done a really nice job on the usability of the interface here. We get very nice condensed information in this kind of middle graph. You can see both the number of citations over time and the publications for a particular author. In this case, we have only documents up to 2013, and I assume that's when he left the University of Nebraska at Lincoln and went elsewhere, eventually coming to Catholic University. Interestingly, he's not represented as a Catholic University author within Scopus. Sometimes one has to do name variants to find the right person. And this is where something like ORCID can really help us, because he may publish under Aaron Dominguez, A. Dominguez. He might use his middle initial on some things. In this set on Scopus, and this is only up till 2013, the total number of documents that we have in here is 649 with about 45,000 citations. So that's different than what we found in Web of Science. And for this particular author, because it's more inclusive of his more recent publications as well, going up to 2021, I would say when you're analyzing Dr. Dominguez, Web of Science does a better job in representing his scholarly output. But that's only because Scopus hasn't included all of the more recent publications that he's done in the last 9 years. Now, there's some other information down here which can be useful to look at. They've recently announced a beta of grants awarded to a particular researcher. You can also see the cluster of co-authorship. Physics is famous for having many, many authors on a paper because there's a lot of institutional collaboration within physics. And here again, just thinking of the different H-index numbers we've seen, for the publication set that's in Scopus, we have an H-index of 93. So we've seen anywhere from 120 on the high end to 93 here to a little bit less with Google Scholar. So just noting that all of these things are going to be slightly different. When we look at Dr. Noon, again, we have the same information, and also we have fewer citations within Scopus. Scopus started out really in representing the STEM disciplines as its kind of core competency. And since then, it's branched out to include more of the social sciences and even starting to include indexing humanities journals. But really, it does the best representation in STEM disciplines still. I think one could generalize and say that Web of Science started out being more inclusive across disciplinary lines, but the two certainly are kind of growing to blur over time. So we've looked at individual authors. The next thing I want to show you is when you aggregate some of this at the institutional level. And Elsevier also has this product called Scival. And it really allows one to do some more strategic analysis of this, benchmarking between institutions, looking at collaboration, trends analysis over time. You can produce some nice reports. To do some of these things, which I'm not going to show you today because we can go way down a rabbit hole on this kind of thing. What one would do, say if I wanted to compare University of Windsor with Catholic University, the first thing I would do is I would gather together the publication sets over a specified period of time. So say I wanted to do an analysis between the two over the last 10 years. I would first do a search in Scopus for all of the publications attributed to each institution and create different publication sets. I'll click on this and just show you these here.
Just to let you know, Pascal, it's 1250.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move through this more quickly. Scival has a lot of usefulness, particularly for administrators and folks who are in the VP of Research office. All of this rolls up into, and I'm just going to pop back over to the presentation here, into ranking systems, right? So US News and World Report, you probably all have heard of. As research has become much more international, there's been a lot of ranking systems that have developed. I've listed 3 of these here. Typically, these have a mixture of institutional reputation as assessed by others, citation numbers, so research publications, things like significant awards, grants, patents, the internationalization of its faculty and of research collaboration, student satisfaction measures. A number of things go into ranking these. I won't show you, but I will tell you that Catholic University ranks as 50th in the world in theology, religious studies areas. So you can also get a sense of the disciplinary strength of different institutions through these institutional metrics. Briefly, there's lots of caveats around these metrics. One might ask Elsevier, as a publisher of over probably 3,000 journals these days, and also an analytics company, I wonder if they might preference their own titles for inclusion into Scopus. Probably so, right? Some of these measures are only available in one or two products. And if you don't have access to those products, you're not going to be able to take advantage of those. And then we have global equity issues with the wealthier nations in North America and Europe and parts of Asia having better access to these tools than developing and emerging economies in the global south. And all of this results in well-funded institutions and their research probably being overrepresented in these tools. Which leads us to open access and open science, which are really important. Open access provides freely available, not behind paywall, scholarly information. Spark is a great place to begin to learn more about the possibilities and benefits of open access. And the Open Science Foundation is a great place to do the same for data and for scientific open instrumentation and software that's used to analyze software. Briefly, all of this is somewhat, it doesn't represent the arts very well, does it? If you're in theater, dance, music, or the visual arts, how do you measure this stuff? These organizations here are asking these questions and trying to come up with some answers for them. Here are your summary takeaways. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm just going to kind of race through these last slides here. We've provided some further reading for you. In particular, this subject guide by Laura Bradel. I previously worked at the University of Waterloo, and I worked with Laura and her colleagues in doing some of the bibliometrics work there. This is quite good. This article from Sage is really well done. It's in many ways, it's not a systematic review, but it's a review of metrics and their use. And it's from only 2 years ago. So I'll leave it there and see if any of you have any questions. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you very much, Pascal.
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions?
I do. I have a question. My name is Hannah.
Hi.
I'm working on an anti-racist project, and we've had some discussion on how citations can disproportionately favor certain types of authors while excluding others. For example, white male scholars tend to be cited much more often than women scholars or scholars of color.
Right.
So how do you balance this emphasis on citations and citation metrics with kind of these inequalities that have been baked into who cites whom? Does that make sense, that question?
Absolutely. Yeah, DEI is it's something that we need to consider when looking at all of these. The other thing is that a lot of open access journals, which may be venues that underrepresented groups tend to publish in more than commercial journals because perhaps they want access for communities of color and underrepresented communities to have unfettered access to whatever that scholarship is. Open access journals are not well represented, you know, just by and large in these products. So only the most impactful open access journals will be in there. And so I think one needs to point this out when thinking about the utility of bringing scholarship assessment to these areas. And it has to be a huge caveat for considering their importance in that kind of discussion. That's a good
thank
point.
you. Yeah, and I guess it really comes down to tenure and promotion, basically how scholars are rewarded. And so it's a system of, you know, anyway, that's a whole other conversation about how to change tenure and rank and reward systems to foster more diverse and inclusive scholarship practices.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of the journal crisis, pricing crisis, which has such constraints on library budgets, it goes back to promotion and tenure and expectations of academic departments to publish in particular highly ranked and highly rated commercial journals. We're starting to see some of the open access journals having major impacts. And there have been lots of studies done now showing that open access publication actually does impact readership rather positively. And we're on a slow transition, I think, to more of an open access world, which should help the inclusiveness of scholarship, but it's going to take probably decades still, right?
Hey, Pascal, it is 12:59.
Sure.
Okay, I think you
Thank
have
you
to
for your
go.
question. Yeah, I have another minute or so.
Okay.
We can take one more question. And if you want to take other questions after, Kev, you can still do that.
Sure. Well, doesn't look like
Thank you
there's
so
any more
much.
questions. I hope I didn't kill a debate here.
Oh, that's all right. This was a fun thing to work on with Kevin. He and I went to graduate school together in Montreal, and we've stayed in touch. And this was a fun project for us to work on together. And I so appreciate those of you who came out today, and for those who were unable to join us, we'll make the slides and this video available to you all.
Yeah, please send me your email if you have not done so, gunn@cua.edu, and we'll hook you up. Thanks again, Pascal, very much.
Sure. Have a wonderful week, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.